la séance.
I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 11 of the Standing House of Commons Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, January 31st, 2022. The committee is meeting to study the state of Canada's supply chain. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of Thursday, November 25th, 2021. People are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. As per the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on March 10, 2022, all those attending the meeting in person must wear a mask, except for members who are at their place during proceedings.
Comments for the benefit of our witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, please click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece as you know and select the desired channel. As a reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. As always, for members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Colleagues, since the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, Canada's economy has been impacted, as you know, by the global supply chain disruptions, and this is only exacerbated or being exacerbated by recent natural disasters, including forest fires and flooding in British Columbia. And while Canada's supply chain does remain strong, these challenges have exposed some vulnerabilities and areas to improve resiliency and efficiency. And that is why the study we begin today is so important for Canadians. On behalf of the committee members, I want to thank the first witnesses for the study, which are appearing today. Witnesses include the Canadian Canola Growers Association, whom we have representatives, Dave Carey, who's the Vice President, Government and Industry Relations, and Mr. Steve Pratt, Manager, Policy Development. We also have Canadian Produce Marketing Association, Mr. Guy Millette, Chair of the Board of Directors, and Mr. Ron Lemaire, President. And from Supply Chain Canada, we have Christian Allen Buhager, President and Chief Executive Officer. We will now begin the opening remarks with the Canadian Canola Growers Association for 5 minutes. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for inviting Canadian Canola Growers Association to speak to your study in response to the state of Canada's supply chains. I'm joined today by my colleague Steve Pratt, Senior Manager of Transportation and Biofuel Policy, who will be sharing my opening comments with. CCGA is a national association governed by a farmer board of directors, and it represents Canada's 43,000 canola farmers. Canada typically produces 20 million tons of canola a year and exports 90% of that canola in 3 forms: raw seed, canola oil, or canola meal. These products are exported to more than 50 countries around the world, and in 2021 was valued at $13.7 billion. Canada is the world's largest producer and exporter of canola, and our industry supports 207,000 Canadian jobs and contributes $29.9 billion to the Canadian economy annually. Canola travels on average 1,520 kilometers from farm to be an export position, and there is no alternative for long distance transport of products across the continent except for rail. Farmers strive to maximize both the quantity and quality of their production each year. Once harvested, they sell their canola into the commercial system based on their specific marketing plan, with the overall goal of capturing the highest possible prices at any given time in our global commodity market. Transportation of grain is one of the several commercial elements that directly affects the price offered to farmers. When issues arise in the supply chain, their price farmers receive for their crop, their grain can drop, at times even going below where global commodity levels are. In periods of prolonged rail disruptions, the worst case scenario is that space in grain elevators becomes full and grain companies stop accepting or buying grain from farmers. This can occur even when a farmer has an existing contract for delivery, potentially straining their ability to cash flow their operations. Today's grain supply chain is predicated on having the right grain in the right place at the right time. There are a lot of moving parts in this complex system. I'll now turn over to Steve, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'll address a specific question of what is the state of Canada's supply chain. In crop year 2021, the railway set a new benchmark in the movement of Western Canadian grain, shipping over 61 million tons. All stakeholders benefited from the strong supply chain performance, and it showed what can be done when the grain handling and transportation system works effectively. This 2021-22 crop year has been an illustration of great contrasts and has given us yet another illustration as to how fragile our rail-based agricultural supply chain actually can be. There were two distinct sources of major disruptions: weather events and the recent railway labor issues. Extreme weather events in 2021 severed the critical mainline railway artery twice in 5 months in the same general area in British Columbia. Since full reopening on December 5th of 2021, the railway system recovery is continuing to be an ongoing struggle. This could have been a dire situation for the entire sector, but to some degree, the negative impacts on farmers have been mitigated by the 40% smaller crop harvested last year and the strong export program in the weeks before the railway disruptions. This has had a major impact on the grain sector. Currently, 70% of Western bulk grain is destined to the Port of Vancouver. This has been enabled by the significant investment by grain exporters in the port. The importance of this export outlet cannot be understated. The most recent labor disruption at CP was just the latest issue to imperil the agricultural supply chain. Thankfully, this was resolved within days, but the knock-on effects will still be felt. Looking forward, we clearly see further rising demand for our products, both domestically and internationally. As a country, we need to prioritize and coordinate an approach to critical infrastructure. There's work to be done, there's work being done, but it needs to be expanded. It is complicated, as oftentimes the ownership of tunnels, bridges, railway lines, and roads vary among participants in the supply chain. I would point to the North Shore grain terminals in the Port of Vancouver as just one example. There's one rail line that transits through a tunnel and over a lift bridge to access the 4 grain terminals on the North Shore. This route also serves other bulk commodity terminals. There's no backup routing to serve these terminals in the event of a disruption with the tunnel or the bridge. When critical supply chain infrastructure is imperiled, the entire system is affected. We need to get back into the business of nation building projects. Canadian farmers and the industry will need an effective rail-based transportation system, not just for the transportation of the current crop sizes, but for those of the future, particularly as demand is increasing. Farmers will not be able to capitalize on the opportunities for trade agreements without a reliable rail system that grain shippers and our global customers have confidence in. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Carey and Mr. Pratt, for those opening remarks. We'll now turn it over to the Canadian Produce Marketing Association, and I believe Chair Millett and President Lemaire will be splitting your time, so I'll turn the floor over to you.
We will. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. The Canadian Produce Marketing Association represents over 840 companies growing, distributing, and selling fresh fruit and vegetables in Canada. Ongoing supply chain disruptions continue to have a significant impact on our industry and the Canadian economy. As noted, with me today, my board chair, Guy Millett, will provide firsthand information relative to our sector's challenges. It's important to note that many of the supply chain issues we face today existed before the pandemic and have been dramatically amplified and further complicated business over the past 2 years. And as we move into what could be another wave in Canada and other jurisdictions around the world, we need to ensure we have learned from the past and apply best practices for the future. Compounded issues mean our members are facing death by 1,000 cuts. This includes port congestion, delays and exploding costs in shipping, container shipping, continuing labor shortages from farm to retail, growing inputs and shortages, growing costs of imports and shortages, and inconsistent product delivery. My chair will touch on these challenges in a few moments, but I will say that all of them are impacting the fresh produce supply chain that deals in just-in-time delivery of highly perishable food. For our sector, delays at ports or other points along the supply chain can mean not only lost sales, but also product spoilage and food waste. There is no doubt that these ongoing supply chain disruptions are complex and interconnected. And so too are the solutions, requiring action across multiple federal ministries and departments, as well as collaboration with provincial, territorial, and municipal partners. To ensure an effective whole-of-government approach, there is a need for a supply chain commissioner, mandated and empowered to bring necessary parties together to find short and long-term solutions. In the short term, We must start with the creation of a mechanism to prioritize the movement of perishable and essential goods. In the medium to long term, the revitalization of our port infrastructure, strengthening government oversight over port service standards, and the expansion of programs to streamline the movement of essential and perishable goods must all be considered. In addition, efforts underway in the US to reform shipping legislation and ensure competitiveness and transparency in the shipping industry offer an important model for Canada to follow. At this time, I'd like to hand over the screen to my chair, Mr. Millet, to provide his perspective on the situation.
Bonjour à vous, Ron, Monsieur le Président.
Good morning. Thank you, Ron, Mr. Chair, and committee members. As chair of CPMA, Canadian Produce Marketing Association, I have visibility to the scope of challenges across our supply chain. As a Canadian wholesaler, importer, and exporter based in Montreal, I live these issues every day. As international shipping companies have sent empty containers back to Asia and posted record high profits, the availability and costs of containers have become a huge challenge for Canadian importers and exporters. Over the past 2 years, freight truck shipping costs have also increased 50 to 80%, both cross-border and domestically. For my own experience at Courchaine-Larose, I can attest that between May and December 2021, the following areas of impact under the purview of this study. They're looking at our volume of at least 400 truckloads per week. We've seen a minimum increase of $250,000 per week in freight costs. Since January, increased fuel prices alone have added another $200,000 to these costs. The Just-in-Time program, which has taken 10 years to build and to implement, is under tremendous strain due to the logistics issues, labor shortages, and delays. This is why consumers are seeing disruptions in product availability. At the same time, maritime ports are seeing significant unloading and loading delays, creating challenges to our integrated supply chain. Of course, these challenges all impact the average cost of fresh fruit and vegetables, which has increased by a minimum of 16% in the last year alone. It's important to understand that despite all our best efforts to avoid price increases, many costs are outside of our control and are connected to multiple parts of the supply chain. The result is that most of these price fluctuations are being reflected in the price paid by the consumer, as we have already been seeing in food inflation figures. I'd like to emphasize again that these challenges can't be dealt with by a single government department or in silos. CPMA was appreciative of the opportunity to participate in the National Supply Chain Summit in January. It's imperative that this cross-department work continue. We'd like to thank you for this opportunity to speak to the committee today and look forward to answering any questions that you may have, and we hope we have a lot of questions. Thank you, Mr. Millet, and thank you, Mr. Lemaire.
President Buhager from the Supply Chain Canada. Mr. Buhager, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon. On behalf of Supply Chain Canada and our almost 8,000 members, I want to start by thanking the committee for the opportunity to speak with you today. The COVID-19 crisis has, over the last 2 years, demonstrated just how vulnerable our supply chains can be. Disruptions create real challenges in the everyday life of Canadians. Supply chain issues do fuel inflation, and resolving global supply chain issues would help with inflation, but the issues are complex and multifaceted. Labor disruptions, challenges related to production, sourcing, and transportation have all created challenges and disruptions, coupled with the challenge of increased demand in certain sectors. I want to take a moment to recognize the hard work and innovative approach that so many supply chain professionals have taken over the last few years. They rose to the challenge, and they ensured that Canadians were supplied and supported through great effort. I saw the innovation, I saw the collaboration, and the plain old elbow grease and hard work myself every day in watching these folks. But disruptions have been real, and they will continue to present challenges moving forward. Supply chains, as my colleagues have said, are complex, multi-factor systems that have significant downstream effect, which means when things are improving, the challenges are by no means over. We are pleased that the Government of Canada is creating a supply chain task force to make recommendations on short and long-term actions. At Supply Chain Canada, we look forward to playing a role with the task force. So COVID-19 has revealed and exacerbated weaknesses that already existed in the system. It's been noted earlier by my colleagues. Challenges have included production, sourcing, labor, and transportation issues that have led to many disruptions and shortages. It's vital that Canada becomes more self-reliant, has more internal capacity, and has systems that can collaborate more easily together to solve these challenges. Think, for instance, of a port authority that can more easily integrate with rail and shipping to quickly increase or decrease capacity as needed, would certainly be a significant smoothing of the chain. The COVID-19 pandemic saw changes in demand patterns from consumers, major congestion at various ports across Canada, and certainly, as noted, higher container rates. Today, approximately 12% of global ocean vessel capacity is unavailable due to delays. Prior to the pandemic, that was more normally at 2%. Existing infrastructure is also a major concern. Canada must focus on increasing the capacity and scalability of our gateways and ports to ensure that our supply chains remain healthy and prepared for future impacts. The modernization and digitization, including the automation of some duties of existing infrastructure, will help to ensure that industry workers have the capability to move cargo more efficiently and responsibly. But this is a major overhaul, but one that we believe is critical. The infrastructure of our 5 major gateways is extremely stretched. Port infrastructure modernization is a heavy financial burden and oftentimes a drawn-out process, which generally deters the private sector from making the necessary improvements. It will be valuable for government to work with the private sector to ensure that the infrastructure is upgraded and capable. It will reduce dwell times, smoothing the functioning of the entire chain and loosening bottlenecks. A smooth and reliable supply chain helps to ensure the cross-border trade between Canada and our partners is predictable. It is vital that governments and industry leaders work toward improving logistical systems across Canada to allow for a more interconnected and collaborative approach. Supply chain solutions cannot be implemented through an isolated approach. My colleague Ron mentioned a whole of government approach, and I believe that that's necessary between all levels of government, needed to properly address the difficulties faced by different sectors of the supply chain. The interconnectedness of supply chains in Canada is going to require an ambitious national strategy aimed at tackling the challenges of the various sectors. Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I'd certainly, as my colleagues have noted, also be pleased to answer any questions that members have.
Thank you very much for your opening remarks, Mr. Buhager. We will begin the round of questioning today with Member of Parliament Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for taking time out today to be with us and provide your perspectives. So, first question to our friends in the Canola Growers Association. You outlined some of the concerns and challenges and indicated that last year harvest was down to 40% smaller than usual. As we're going into the coming season, knowing that it's such an important part of the Western Canadian economy, and we face these supply chain disruptions, how concerned are canola growers about the ability to ship their product at the end of the season?
I can start. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think there's optimism certainly going into the planting season, but there's also significant, I think, concern generally. These disruptions have a knock-on effect, and Steve alluded to the outage around the BC Fraser Canyon area. We're still feeling the repercussions from that. And I think what it really comes down to is that while Canada controls about 60% of the global trade of canola, it is a fierce global marketplace, and our concerns around when delays ultimately end up impacting Canada's reputation as a reliable supplier of canola or oil seeds, and that's when it becomes a major concern. We've got markets that really depend on it. Steve, would you like to add anything further?
Just quickly that, I mean, certainly in the farming community, we take it year by year, right? So last year was last year. Hopefully all people in the supply chain and all parties have learned from that. Looking forward to the melting here and putting a new crop in the ground, and hopefully all parties tightening things up for next year.
Thank you. And you talked about the need to, build capacity out for rising demand. How do we make sure we do that quickly enough so that we don't lose that market share that you just talked about, that we're in a competitive global marketplace? And, this is a very much a Canadian Cinderella crop.
Yeah, certainly in the grain sector, when we look to the West Coast as being that dominant outflow to the world, and Vancouver specifically, pretty much all the real estate there is now accounted for and spoken for. So what we see from the shippers of our product is optimizing the existing footprints they have at port, right? So, upgrading loaders, upgrading discharging, tweaking the actual the way that the rail cars come in, things like that, trying to get a bit of a boost out of the existing infrastructure, because there's no real estate left for new builds. So it's going to be putting more through in the future the existing facilities we have.
Thank you. Question to the Canadian Produce Marketing Association. And I know in November you put out an urgent call to action, including a letter to the Prime Minister and 12 different cabinet ministers outlining the summary I saw had 6 different challenges, some of which were articulated today, in terms of the cost of container shipping being exponential, in terms of port congestion for the fresh produce sector. And I had a meeting virtually with members of your association in January, and they described to me the story of a container of fruit in the Port of Vancouver where the fruit had rotted before it even had a chance to be shipped any further from the container in the port. So, 4 months later, have you heard back from the Prime Minister ministers? Are we better off? Are we worse off? Where are things at?
I can take that. First, thank you, Mr. Moy. We are seeing change, slow but sure. We have heard back from the government, and we have participated in the roundtables around the supply chain issues, and trying to provide some input from agriculture. And Ms. Koutrakis was one of the co-chairs in our session. Good to see you again, as well as Francis Drouin. The key that we're seeing, though, is the foundational challenges around the supply chain for us. And it goes back to labor as one of those core components. And then on top of that, we're starting, as I mentioned, about the compounding issues. And my colleague Christian talked about this as a global challenge, and talked about the 12% of shipping containers not available. That's significant for us. And, it's one thing to look at our own ports, but it's another thing to actually just look at how this entire system works like a symphony. It comes together, and all pieces have to be working in harmony. And when you see one piece of the entire system start falling apart, and it could be trucking, could be rail, could be containers, could be the labor component therein, you start seeing the symphony misbeats. And that's where we still are. The symphony isn't sounding finely tuned. We have to get back to that tuning of the symphony. And to do it, we need to look at some key tools. And I'm going to say the reputation of Canada is at stake. We need to make sure the global market knows we're open for business, and that we are putting in place tools and tactics to address the issues that are happening within our own borders, and recognizing some of the other levers that are happening globally, and use those levers effectively. I can hand it over to my chair because I know he's living it.
Yes, absolutely. And it's been a constant challenge. The produce industry have this higher component than a lot of others food product do not have, is the high perishability of the product. Unfortunately, the shipping line, the main shipping lines are not Canadian company, they're international company. They don't follow our rule, they follow their own rule, and they have sent to most of their customers back several months ago a notice that they are not responsible for delay. You know, a container used to take 20 days, 21 days that comes from South America. It's now over 40 to 42 days. If they respect the required temperature in the container, they will not take any responsibility for the delay. But if you're shipping citrus and their shelf life is about 6 weeks, by the time the product arrives here, it's almost end of life. And nobody is responsible. The shipper is not responsible. The carrier is not responsible. So the Canadian importer has to take the beating on this, and it's been costing hundreds of thousands of dollars for waste of product that arrive end of life.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Millet.
Thank you, Mr. Millet.
Next round of questioning goes to Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, you have 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to say welcome to all of our guests today as well. Certainly, this is a topic which has seen considerable discussion and concern, particularly since the pandemic disruptions and so on. So when we talk about climate change and emergencies and the damage done by storms and so on, and other factors beyond our control in some cases, the supply chain has been hammered the last couple of years. Maybe Mr. Beauregard, maybe you can comment on what do you see as the most important structural challenges facing our supply chain?
Mr. Chair, through you to the member, I appreciate the question. I think it's an important foundational setting question, and what I want to start with is to have the members understand that disruption in supply chain is not new. It has existed, and supply chain professionals have worked through those disruptions. The challenge, of course, is that there are too many potential points of failure within the chain. And if I'm going to answer the question and suggest where we feel and where we talk to our members about the points of relief, they're not easy. We will always have those in the supply chain that are able to manage the disruptions, but the changes that will need to be more resilient are more fundamental, and they're larger, and they're going to require more significant investment. And so let me just paint a picture of a couple. Today, corporations have different visibility into their supply chain. And so those that are more matured and have the resources may be able to see to what we would call tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. So you can imagine as a chain, you have the tier 1 are those that supply you, tier 2 supply your suppliers, and downstream, and you may have multiple levels depending on how complex your corporation is. So many Canadian corporations, and again, it's not unique to Canada. Many of these challenges are not unique to Canada. Only have the ability to see tier 1, maybe tier 2. They don't have the visibility downstream into their supply chains to understand exactly where things are coming from. So recently with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we did a survey out to our members, and we asked them if they felt they had the necessary visibility in order to adjust to that geopolitical situation. And only 14% thought they had the requisite visibility. A number of them didn't realize that they had suppliers that would be in Russia or Ukraine because it was tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. So visibility, the transparency of the supply chain is critically important as it go forward. The fixing that will not be easy. The other is automation. And here we've gotten very good at automation at certain points in the supply chain. So warehouses, for example, robotic automation, they do a great job. Go to anybody's distribution center, you'll see incredible automation. But then go to one of our ports, and you won't see that same level of automation. You'll see things that are manual, things that are paper. So again, the ability to automate cannot just be a solution that's in one aspect of the supply chain. Great, a warehouse fully automated. But if things haven't been able to get to that because there is no automation, then again, the system breaks down. So visibility, transparency, automation, certainly infrastructure investments, and you can count those as some, are all things that we feel are going to be fundamental. And as I suggest, they're not going to be easy, fast, cheap to resolve. And they're going to take a mindset change for many within the supply chain, but they're going to be necessary if we're truly, Mr. Chair, through you to the member, going to be deemed to be resilient going forward. So if that helps.
I'm not sure how much time I have, but anyway, Mr. Lemire.
You have one and a half minutes, Mr. Rogers.
Well, thank you. That was a great answer, by the way. I enjoyed the presentation that you gave there and the comments to the question. Mr. Lemire, you mentioned prior challenges prior to the pandemic. So can you elaborate maybe on what are some possible solutions and how do we get our supply chain working more efficiently or get it right, I guess?
Yeah. So I want to build on the automation discussion. I think there is opportunity on automation, but I do want to go back to the component around labor. So we need to look at an effective immigration policy that will enable us to bring in the right labor, and it could be truck drivers, it could be other skilled labor that can work within operations, warehouses. We have a 26% gap in our warehouse structure right now through the supply chain. And with absenteeism, if another wave comes through, we'll see that increase on the impact. So as we look at automation, it can do a lot for us, but in the end, people drive our business. And we need to look at how are we getting more truck drivers into the system on a domestic level. We don't use a lot of rail, but when rail is impacted, as we saw recently with the potential strike, everyone moves to trucks. And all of a sudden, the trucking industry tightens up even more. So we need to look to ensure how do we work with the provinces to drive licensing, insurance, and some other opportunities to improve access for new truck drivers, find them around the world if possible and domestically, and try and drive that change in those pieces. And I hate to say, we need to segment down the issues and look at them individually and reconnect them to make sure we deal with the entire problem, not just siloed.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Maire. Prochainement.
Thank you, Mr. Lemire. Mr. Barcelo Duval, you have 6 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Mr. Pratt or Mr. Carey. Some time ago, we had this CN strike, which people talked about which was talked about a great deal. There was a propane shortage in Quebec. I imagine that was the case for people in the West as well. Do you think that this is something that, given the difficulties we have with supplies everywhere, do you think that this same situation could reoccur? And is there any way to protect ourselves from this by dealing with supply issues by adapting our methods?
I can begin. I'll let Steve speak to the details of that particular one. I think, yeah, there's and Steve can correct me wrong. We've had I think it's almost a labor issue a year with one of the national railroads. We go back about 10 years. That does not include blockades, natural disasters, severing of lines. So yeah, considerable concern, and I believe there's a potential later this year for a potential CN disruption. But I'll defer to Steve in the details. But it is concerning, and I think that's what we need. We need vision and leadership and strategy, and some of that comes down to the Ministerial Supply Chain Summit that happened earlier this year that we participated in, committees like yours taking on this topic and making it a priority. And I think having a vision that is not tied to electoral cycles. We need 5, 10, 20, 50-year visions for our infrastructure in Canada. The actual details, maybe I'll ask Steve just to quickly comment on the particular CN issue, but it is concerning, absolutely.
Yeah, and very, very briefly, I mean, within the railways, they've got their multiple unions that have their agreements with the employer, and there's a whole schedule of those, and they there's interested parties such as ourselves or yourselves. I mean, you can see those, so when these are coming up. It's just again, with all the legal protection for that collective bargaining arrangement, it is concerning, and that is something that's within our nation's control. And that's one of those things about visibility from external customers around the world. It's one thing people can appreciate an act of God, a natural disaster, etc. They do scratch their heads though when it seems like it's reoccurring labor issues breaking down the supply chain, as you mentioned, consistently.
Merci.
Thank you. You also talked about events such as we saw earlier, the blockade and the disruption, the blockades by the Indigenous people in the West. So there are a lot of things can affect the supply chain. So my question is, what makes us more aware of it today? Are these risks that have always existed in the past? We seem to be more aware of them today.
I believe the risks have always been. They've certainly been compounded by things like COVID and others we've discussed. I think as an industry too, we're looking to. The concern is these are issues we're having with our current capacity. And as an industry in the canola industry, we're looking to intensify production, produce more on the same amount of land using less imports. So the vision for our industry, when we're Canada's largest agriculture commodity, is to move more product. There's more demand than we can really supply. So the concern is if we're having these disruptions with our current levels of production, as we look to intensify and increase our production, that'll further exacerbate the system. So I think visibility is higher because of things like COVID, but these have been ongoing as my colleagues from supply chain and CPMA have said. But we're feeling them more acutely now, I think, as Canadians are more focused on supply chain, as our parliamentarians, because we saw parts of the pandemic when things weren't available. So I think it's become an acute thing, but these are long-term conversations that we need to have. But Merci.
Thank you. My next question is for the Canadian Produce Marketing Association, Mr. Lemaire or Mr. Millet. We talked about supply problems in the area of fruits and vegetables. These are food goods that come from quite a distance, and they can't be produced year-round here. But last year, even the past 2 years, in Quebec, would it be relevant to change our production so that we depend more heavily on local production and not have to have things come from afar? Definitely. And this is already part of the solution. Local products have always been important. I think that we've had a need to really rely on local goods and produce them at the best possible cost. But there are some categories of products for which we can't do anything. If you take a look at the supply of vegetables in North America, these are vegetables that are coming to us from Mexico or the United States. Fruits, well, this is international imports. We do have fruits coming from Canada, United States, but fruits do come from afar. So this type of production is limited here. And we've diversified a great deal in Quebec. We've got all kinds of very interesting projects underway. We're looking at greenhouse fruits, but these products are expensive, and customers aren't always prepared to buy greenhouse strawberries that cost $5 or $6 for a pint. But what you have to understand that bananas, pineapples, citrus fruit, and all kinds of other fruits will never come from Canada or from the northern area of the United States. But we try to get our supplies as close as possible, and today it's even more true. Thank you very much, Mr. Millet, and thank you, Mr. Barcelon-Duval.
Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
To all of our witnesses for their testimony on this interesting and quite complex topic. I wanted to kick off by picking up on Mr. Bougier, and I hope I've pronounced your name at least somewhat close. My apologies if not. But you, at one point in your testimony, you were sort of playing with a metaphor involving a symphony, and that, you know, when the supply chain is working, it's this complex symphony and all of these parts that are working in unison, and that we're at a point now where those parts need tuning. And I was thinking about the aptness of that metaphor, but also the problem that the concert house is on fire. And so we can tune all the parts, but we have this larger existential issue of the global climate predicament. I'm wondering if you could talk about your views on the long-term implications of global climate change, especially what some of the models are predicting for our country, and the implications for that finely tuned symphony that you described in your testimony.
So, Mr. Chair, through you to the member, I can't play any instrument. I grew up a baseball player. I know it was my colleague, Mr. Lemaire, that actually used the metaphor. So I might turn to him to respond to his good analogy, but I can certainly take a follow-up if you'd like. You don't want a baseball player trying to be a symphony conductor, that's for sure.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to comment if it pleases the member.
Please go ahead.
So climate change is a significant concern for the agri-food sector and our community. When we looked at the atmospheric rivers, the heat dome that came first in Vancouver, and the disruptions that it created in supply, but also in production, we're seeing this on a more frequent level, and we're seeing it around the world. And as Mr. Millet noted, you know, we rely heavily on a strong domestic production, but also a global import strategy to meet our cultural mosaic across the country, which is Canada. And how we need to address our climate change strategy is hand in hand with our supply chain solutions. And it does link into our discussions around energy, fuel. You know, with fuel costs going through the roof, what other options are available to us on fast tracking to Christian's comment on automation? You know, what are we doing on moving towards more electric vehicles within the logistics field? You know, how are we moving into, you know, transitioning away from fossil fuels and looking at strategies that are cost effective? Because I think in the end, we have to recognize the symphony has to have all the pieces connected. And, you know, we can't add a new instrument into the symphony without making sure it knows the song. It knows that it has the same, it knows what tune it should be playing, and it knows where it is in the symphony, whether it's the number one cellist or in the number four. It has to understand where it fits to move itself to the front. So yes, there's a significant opportunity.
Having the wrong witness with that great metaphor. I don't play an instrument either, so that might be part of the problem there. But picking up where you left off, it seems to me that some of the problems with the supply chain are well within our control, and we can envision strategies that deal with things like the availability of shipping containers, or issues, challenges with labor relations. Those are things that we can impact through better policy. This larger instability that's being introduced into the system at an ever greater rate seems to be a real challenge for this somewhat fragile symphony that we've built, this just-in-time model that relies on very dependable, very consistent connections between various modes of transportation. My question, and any of the witnesses can provide their thoughts on this, is that just-in-time model the best model in light of the great uncertainties that are coming with global climate change?
I can start if you want, just for a few seconds. The actual just-in-time delivery model has actually took a long time to put in place, because with today's perishability of product, people wants to have the fresher product and the longest possible shelf life for their product, no matter what it is. My concern is in produce, but the just in time is actually giving the end consumer that 3, 4, 5, 6 days extra to be in total control in order to avoid food waste. So we can definitely start loading much larger quantity just in case. But the problem is we're going to go totally against what we're trying to build on food waste. And this is a major component. Maybe there's some non-perishable product that can probably address easier into the food chain. But in the fresh product and agriculture product, that component is key. It's going to be very hard to go back to a non-just-in-time situation.
Maybe while while you're responding, I'll pick up on something you mentioned. I hope I have the right witness. You mentioned an idea around a supply chain commissioner. Do I have the right?
That's right. So my suggestion around that is actually it would be a government appointed position that can have oversight across multiple jurisdictions and departments. So that's the key relative to connecting the dots. But I would encourage someone from industry. We work closely with many, government bureaucrats and elected officials, but you need to live and understand how the industry works, and you need that person who has their hands in the mud, so to speak, right, to get the job done.
I guess the question
Thank you very much, Mr. Lemaire and Mr. Backrack. Sorry, that is
Thanks,
a very
Mr. Chair.
interesting
No, it's
question.
all good. I'll pick up on it next time.
Another one of our colleagues, if not you, Mr. Backrack, will pick up on that in the next round. Next, we have Mr. Genereux. Mr. Genereux, you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Actually, Chair, it's going to be Marilyn Gladue. Hello there and
Ms.
good afternoon.
Good to see you virtually. Welcome
Always
to
love
today.
it when you guys have a great topic of conversation. I'm going to start my questions to the chemistry industry, to my friend Bob Masterson. So we've seen a lot of... No, he's not on yet? Okay. Well, then I'm going to... Do we have the Association of Port Authorities? Excellent. Good. Let's start there. So... we don't. Sorry, I'm coming in late on this one. Do you want to do yours then? Yeah, you start.
If it's okay with you, Mr. Chair, we'll switch back to me taking the questions.
Not at all, Mr. Genereux. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thanks. If you guys, appreciate you guys coming and virtually taking the time here at committee today on a Thursday afternoon. So not only are we facing supply chain issues, but we're also facing a massive housing crisis too. We're seeing the average cost of a Canadian home right now reaching $868,000, making it virtually unaffordable for a lot of young Canadians really to get into the market. So, and the Canadian Home Builders Association has said that sourcing materials has driven up the cost of materials and has added tens of thousands of dollars onto the cost of building a home. The Bank of Canada has said that production shortage on various goods such as appliances, plumbing fixtures, windows, as well as shipping bottlenecks at ports all over the world continue to cause delays for many of the builders. I know that's not necessarily your guys' area of expertise, but from the canola growers or from the Produce Marketing Association, but I suspect you probably have some experience in seeing what these delays may cause. So I'm going to first go to Christian, if you're okay with that, Christian, and maybe just explain some of the issues here happening at the ports. You know, you can see out on the English Bay the big tankers sitting there, and they sit there for months in a lot of ways. Is it getting through the ports? Is it on our side, the Canadian side? Has it gone smoothly up to that point? Is it the trucking side? I guess from your perspective, maybe break it down a little bit for us, if you don't mind.
Mr. Chair, through you to the member, so a wonderful question, and I appreciate it. I think the first thing that I want all of the members to appreciate is that this is not a unique situation to Canada. It's not a unique situation to Canada's ports. And I think that's just important for us to recognize. All ports globally are finding the same challenges. But here's the issue. All ports, for the most part, operate the same way. And they operate in a way where there is not a synchronization between all of the parties that exist within a port. it's still a relatively manual process. It is labor intensive. It relies on there being enough chassis to take the container and move the container before something else can move. So there is a lot of discussion now around whether or not that remains in today's world the best way to manage, schedule, offload ports. Again, not just here in Canada, at every port.
So what then, Christian? Sorry, just to like, I guess examples, if we can, like what's happening then in the Port of Vancouver. I know we went as a committee a few years back and toured it, and at the time it seemed like truck drivers and the trucking industry was where a lot of the holdups are. I guess, could you speak specific to something like the Port of Vancouver and what that is, what the holdup is in that particular port?
So no, Mr. Chair, to the member, I can't speak. It would be, I think, unfair for me to speak about Vancouver. But again, Vancouver is no different than any other port in the sense of how it operates is synchronized and how the different players and pieces that function at port. People don't realize that in a port you have a number of different actors that are all working together.
So how quickly are things getting off the boats then? Like, are they? Because again, like those tankers out there in English Bay, like I'm picking on Vancouver here, but as you say, it's everywhere. How, like, are they getting off the boats and then it's sitting in the ports? Are they waiting out in the ocean? And then I guess trying to figure out where the things, the solutions are that we can really focus on during the study.
Yeah, and I think you've asked the right question. The challenge is the answer isn't one piece within that. And I think that's what I would really want the members to appreciate, is that the synchronization of all of that has to change fundamentally in how it operates. And that's going to come through automation that's going to allow the right scheduling so that things can move faster. It's not that they're not being as effective and efficient as they can be within the construct that they have. The question is, we probably need to change the construct. Now, I will say, and I've been slapped on the wrist before for saying this, when we talk, and I was at the supply chain summit with my colleagues that are on the phone, and I raised the issue of automation in the ports. That immediately raised concern from the labor unions that were also participating. And my point was, this isn't about a question of reducing the human capacity. I'm not here to try to suggest that we shouldn't have union workers and we shouldn't have more. But they don't have the tools, the automation tools, to be able to do things. This is a fundamental shift in how all ports need to operate. The challenge is going to be, is Canada going to step up and invest and push the envelope to make those changes, or are we going to wait for someone in Europe or someone in San Francisco to do it? So it's a complex issue. These are all complex issues. That's the challenge. And I wish I had silver bullets. We don't, though. So
thank you very much, Mr. Buhager, and thank you very much, Mr. Genereux. Next, we have Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I really appreciate this discussion, and I'm going to be concentrating my questions on Mr. Buhager. Back in 2019, we presented a report to the House of Commons, the report on a Standing Committee on Transportation, Infrastructure and Communities, entitled the Interim Report on Establishing a Canadian Transportation Logistics Strategy. I would recommend that all the witnesses today take a good read over that and possibly send ourselves, me in particular, as one member of the committee, some of your thoughts on that strategy. The reason for that, and Mr. Buhager, goes to your comments with respect to what you're speaking about, and I want you to comment a bit more on it, digging a bit deeper into the weeds. Commenting on the need for redundancy, whether it be rail, road, air, or water. Primarily rail and road, because we see a lot of the port-related infrastructure, to some extent, at par with expectations, as well as air. I'll get back to that in a second. Secondly is the importance of infrastructure investments, and then add to that not only the investments of new capital projects, but equally as important, managing the assets that we currently have. The St. Lawrence Seaway, for example, system, Welland Canal in my neck of the woods, but also the Asia Pacific, Halifax, Montreal, Centerport, the list goes on. How important it is for strategically located trade corridors that can take advantage of that multimodal network that's available throughout the country. Ports modernization, you mentioned that earlier. We are embarking on a ports modernization review as we speak, how important that is. And of course, getting into your testimony, or getting into this report, your testimony about that and the other points that I'm bringing up. Integrating distribution, data, and digital logistics. Again, I need to hear from you, your testimony on that, so I can get that on the record. And then finally, what I would like to do to a message to the analyst is also add as an exhibit for this study the actual Canadian transportation and logistics strategy as part of this study, so that therefore it can be referenced, because a lot of the recommendations, 31 of them, can be as well leveraged in this study as well. So, Mr. Bouhogier, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, through you to the member, thank you, and certainly have my commitment to, as an organization, look at the study, and we'll send you our feedback directly. Just a few things, because you touched on many of them, and I think they're all valuable, and I think you're spot on. But let me just deal with three comments for the sake of time. One is that your question around what I would call secondary transport corridors, twinning of our transportation routes. It's critical, but it's a challenge. We're a large country. Twinning all of our transport corridors would be probably uneconomical. So the question then becomes to strategically look at where we need to ensure that we have secondary corridors and make those investments in those places. With respect to ports, what I will say is that one of the challenges we have, I spoke earlier mostly around automation. The other challenge we have is we don't have, beyond our 5 international gateways, really the ability to quickly put into action other international ports. Now, Canadian Border Services has had an issue with that, and in the past, I think that's an area where this committee might spend some of its time in understanding how can we ensure that we have alternative international gateways, so that when our 5 are congested, that there's an opportunity to use others. There, I'm going to pick up on certainly your neck of the woods and St. Lawrence and the Great Lakes. There, again, we have an opportunity with the St. Lawrence and the Great Lakes to look at how that can be incorporated into our international gateway system. And certainly, I think all of those types of opportunities to expand our transport corridors would be helpful. So again, Mr. Chair, through you to the member, I hope that was an answer, and we'll certainly follow up on the strategy comments.
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left?
You have 30 seconds.
Mr. Bouhogier, last question is with respect to I guess the importance of working with our binational partners too. When we look at the Great Lakes, for example, and the St. Lawrence system, we have the Americans that share that resource with us. How important is it to also, everything I mentioned earlier in terms of the investments, in terms of the fluidity, et cetera, how important is it for us to work with our American partners?
So my quick answer will be critical. The reason for that, and I suggested in my testimony that a national strategy was important for supply chain, even more important would be if we had a North American strategy. In supply chain, the larger you expand out the strategy, the more beneficial it is to ensure that the flow works. So I think you're on to something, and I certainly encourage you to continue down that path.
Great, thank you. Thank you for being here, Mr. Bouhogier, and all the other witnesses. And Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Badaway. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelou.
Next, we have Mr. Barcelou Duvel. You have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Mr. Bouhogier. I'm sorry if I have mispronounced your name. Up until now, we have not talked about cybersecurity, but over the past few weeks, quite a few people have testified about this issue with respect to the supply chain. I'd like to hear whether this is an issue, in your opinion, for the supply chain, and what are we doing about it?
Mr. Chair, through you to the member, I think this is an important question. Let me just give you one statistic to start. I mentioned earlier that recently we did a survey of our members with respect to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. One of the questions that we asked in that survey was whether or not their companies were discussing cybersecurity and business continuity with their suppliers. And I can tell you that in that survey, only 37% of the respondents said that they were having discussions on cybersecurity with their tier one suppliers. So herein lies the issue again. It's a critical issue that can disrupt supply chains, but we aren't necessarily, our corporations are not necessarily all of them having the conversations. And if they're having conversations within the confines of their corporation, they may or may not be downstream through the tiers of their suppliers having enough conversations. And so this is a critical issue, and I wish I had the answer for it, but I think this committee and the government needs to really look at ensuring that our corporations are having those discussions and that the support is there for them and their suppliers to make sure that they have resolutions in place.
If I still have some time remaining, I'd like to ask the CPMA a question. I talked about local production beforehand, but now we're looking at micro producers. They have small fields, and these micro producers, is there any way that we could get them integrated into the a wider supply chain? Oh, I'd like to hear what you have to say. Indeed, yes. There's a really good future for these micro producers. We're not going to broaden access to them because otherwise, but because there's this, that would be a bit of a contradiction, because when we talk about micro producers, we think about local production and selling produce to local people. There's a lot of pride associated with that. So we see a lot of these microprocessors in the organic field. But this is a very promising pathway, and I'm sure that hundreds of thousands of people are going to get involved with this micro-production. Thank you, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was recently some news from Canfor indicating that they're going to be cutting back production at their Western Canadian sawmills due to constraints in the supply chain. In the riding that I represent, this means that sawmills will be cutting back shifts and workers will have less work. Obviously a big concern for us. I'm wondering, probably to Mr. Buhagiar, what can be done to mitigate the impact of these supply chain challenges on the forest industry? And then perhaps secondly, if you could comment on the issue of shipping product. When you have a backlog of product that needs to get to market, who makes the decisions around prioritization? And how can that be resolved so that companies like Canfor can get their product to market in a reliable way?
Mr. Chair, through you to the member, thanks for the question. I can't answer the first part of the question. I don't have that knowledge, but let me come to the second on prioritization, if I might. If we look to the earlier conversation of ports, there isn't a prioritization. There isn't generally a prioritization in the transport system. That's one of the things that came up with critical supplies during the pandemic. Things work in a very linear fashion in that world. And so we can't pick and choose what we want to take off a ship or what we want to put necessarily on to train and get them moving. And that's a challenge of the linear nature of the system, our system isn't as responsive in that sense as we might think or hope that it is. And I think, again, those are fundamental changes that need to happen before that sense of prioritizing certain things and getting them out and on the road would even be able to take place.
Left, but I'll use what I have left to ask Mr. Lemaire. I believe it was you, Mr. Lemaire, that mentioned this idea of a supply chain commissioner. And I wonder if that kind of prioritization might be something that someone in that role could work on. Because, you know, my understanding as it now sits, you might have perishable product from the Produce Marketing Association that needs to get to market, where other non-perishable products are ahead of those products in the line and have been prioritized. Is that kind of prioritization something that you would see the commissioner that you mentioned tackling?
Yes.
Very quick response, Mr. Lemaire.
The short answer is yes, and then looking at what the right municipal, provincial, and federal levers need to be in place to help that happen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lemaire. Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Ms. Gladue. Ms. Gladue, the floor is now yours. You have 5 minutes.
Good, because I have the right list of witnesses now, but the questions are the same. So I'm going to start off, let's talk to any of the witnesses that want to talk about the rail situation in Canada. We've seen numerous rail blockades, disputes, labor disputes that have impacted the supply chain in rail across Canada. And, that situation looks like it's vulnerable. So I'm just interested from the Canadian Canola Growers Association or from Supply Chain Canada, what do you think the federal government needs to do to put some more resiliency and confidence in that supply chain?
Want to start, Steve?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. So I guess on the labor side, certainly there's, under the Canadian Labor Code, there are the mechanisms in place now. Perhaps a role where we could migrate towards would perhaps be longer contracts between the various labor unions and the employers. Again, because now we seem to be on this like 2 to 3 year cycle and putting that vulnerability in. And again, oftentimes in the shipping community, shippers see that eventually these disputes end up in binding arbitration 2 days, 8 days after the actual strike or lockout. And is there a way to perhaps affect that prior to the actual lockout occurring? Because certainly prior to the lockout, the railways have to start winding down the operations. And even with, even if it does not, or the lockout or strike doesn't occur, then you've got to start winding back up your operation. So that has an immediate tangible impact on the supply chain for all shippers. And to your second point around the infrastructure and whatnot, I think we see the individual companies in our supply chain putting in investments, and certainly around prioritizing. The companies have their own what they need to do. The shippers do what they need to do. And I think a role of government would be to have, and some of this was talked about in the 2015 Canadian Transportation Act review, which might seem like a lifetime ago, but it was only 7 years. There were some good things in there around governance, and that's a role that the federal government could play around long-term infrastructure planning and investment, et cetera.
Very good. Yeah, I think the speed of response of the government when there is an issue is critical. And I'll take a look at that report. Now, with respect to the ports, I'm interested to understand how we think Canada's positioned to sustain our supply chain there, especially, we've had issues with all of the BC disastrous flooding, et cetera. But how are we positioned for growth, and how are we positioned right now for capacity in Canada? And maybe Christian can answer that one.
Sure, Mr. Chair, through you to the member, we're not positioned for growth. We have a limited capacity. We're over that capacity in some sense, which is why we have all of the issues that we've talked about with ships at sea, and we're not going to speed that up unless we do two things. One will be change the process of how ports work. That's going to require automation. That's going to require investment. And two, we have to open up additional international gateway ports. So it's not like we only have 5 ports in the country, but we only have 5 ports that act as international gateways. And so again, if we need to open up more, then I think that's a conversation for the government and the parts of the government such as CBSA to have to ensure that we can have growth. We all want growth in the economy. The question is very apt in that sense, but we don't have capacity now. We're not going to clear in the next few days the backlog that we have. I think the members need to recognize that. So if you want growth, you're going to have to, I think, automate and expand a new international gateways for us.
Excellent. And is there anything the federal government can do? I hear about the shipping container shortage. Is there anything that we could do there? Put that out to anybody that wants to weigh in.
Only if you're going to open up a company and make them. I mean, it is I say that in jest. I don't mean to sound disrespectful, but it is, there are only so many containers that are made and that are in field. And so unless we're going to make more, it is a challenge. Now, dwell times are an issue, and the more that we can do to ensure that we empty containers as quick as possible and get them back into the system, that's critical. But some of that is the fact that we do not have enough capacity. Certainly during the pandemic, we were backed up. And so because we were backed up, we couldn't empty containers and then get containers back into the system quick enough. We had to, we ran out of warehouse space in a lot of sectors. And so warehouses became the containers. So there are a limited number of containers in the world. We struggle with geopolitical considerations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bruhager, and thank you very much, Ms. Gladue. Next, we have Mr. Iachino. Mr. Iachino, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for coming today. Mr. Bougier, what role could a better data collection and data sharing play in the supply sector? Could you provide us with some examples?
So, Mr. Chair, through you to the member, this is an interesting question. We won't have time for the response. We might take it offline if the member wishes. Everybody believes that sharing of data will be the panacea. And certainly visibility in the sharing of data is important and critical, but sharing data in and of itself is not going to be the answer. And in fact, we don't even use the same data across all of the systems that work within the supply chain. And so the ability to actually have a single operative working language of what we're talking about doesn't exist yet. So if the member would like, in the US, they're looking at a study called FLOW, which is trying to bring together a number of parties to look at this. But there are a number of, I think, thoughtful individuals in supply chain that think this won't resolve the issue because they're not looking at the right issue. And again, I'm happy if the member would like to take this offline and have a conversation at some point or share back to the committee. It is a complicated issue, actually, and one that I think we should understand, because we talk a lot about data sharing in supply chain and visibility, and I've mentioned it myself. It's not as simple as it seems, but it's a great question and one that I think the committee should unpack.
Is it possible to, because you mentioned that many collect different types of data, is it possible to at least share with us what you collect as data and why, so that at least we can look at that around the globes, let's say, why are so X and Y collecting such data? And this way we can figure out where to go with that. So that could help us a lot, since you're saying that not everybody's collecting the same type of data. If that can be provided to the clerk, I'd appreciate it.
We will, Mr. Chair, to the member, we will provide that to the committee through the clerk.
Thank you. Pour Monsieur Lemaire or Monsieur...
Mr. Lemaire or Mr. Millet or Mr. Carey, the members of your organizations, would they be prepared to share exclusive data with us in order to improve the fluidity of our supply chains?
Perhaps I could start. Thank you for the question. There's there may not be a need to share exclusive data relative to the data that is being collected. I think the bigger question is how do we consolidate the data that the government itself is collecting and more effectively leverage that data. So the complexity around moving food, you start looking at, the import and export data, and we have through CFIA an import-export portal. But beyond that, streamlining more effective mechanisms so it's shared through departments is key. And the reality for industry, if there's non-competitive data that is missing, that can be available, most definitely, whether leveraging and using the associations to help provide that data or sitting down within a one-on-one.
So can you provide us the type of data that you collect? And since we're hearing that everybody collects different data. And secondly, is there any type of data that you would not share and why? So that this gives us an understanding of, can that too, if you can provide us with that.
Most certainly.
Like what information would you insist on keeping confidential?
If I could, Mr. Chair, as well, we can certainly provide data. So the data for imports and exports of canola is publicly available. It's all through harmonized sales codes. We have all of that. The data that we really track, and Steve certainly does, is the performance of the railway. So we certainly have grain shipping data and reports that Steve helps walk through, that we could certainly share with the committee. That we spend a lot of time as working with grain shippers to understand the performance of the railroads, so we can see when those bottlenecks are. We can see when there's 14 ships off the Port of Vancouver that are idling, costing grain companies money, which then means they might offer less money to farmers. So we've got certainly reports in spades. So my colleague Steve and I can talk offline about what would be most appropriate, but we're happy to share our data. The rest of it's publicly available as it goes through a harmonized sales system. But absolutely, and thank you for the opportunity to share that.
Thank you. And this is a question for all of you. What countries do you think are the best examples of getting supply chains right? Obviously, if you're going to highlight one country, you may certainly know of their data, or certainly know what their interest is. So what would you suggest?
Quick response for whomever takes that one on.
I think it goes back, Mr. Chair, to the member. I think it goes back to my earlier comment to one of the members when I said a national strategy great, a North American strategy greater. I don't know that anyone's got the secret sauce yet, but at least in Europe, because of the European Union, they're able to look at things beyond the individual borders of countries. And I think if we had opportunity to do that in North America, we would probably do better. But that would be one place to look, only because of their construct in allowing them to work as a unit as opposed to individual countries. So that helps the member, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buhagiar and Mr. Iachino. Next, we have Mr. Dowdle. Mr. Dowdle, the floor is now yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to as well thank all our presenters here today. It's certainly interesting to listen to all of them and see the issues that we have not only today, but seem to be continuing. So I don't know exactly who I'd put my question to. I've had some discussions with some of the port authorities and different companies that are having issues with shipping in the last little while, and I'm just kind of curious. The comment that I heard back quite often from these people, and they want to expand what they're doing. They want to sometimes have extra spots away for storage and that. And what I'm hearing quite often from those individuals is that the problem seems to be definitely they're getting a bureaucratic wall up for expansion that's taking long periods of time, large investment, large dollars. They want to go forward. But I think what we're going to have is a major problem, sort of like we do with the housing market, where we don't realize that the issue is as big as it is, and we don't realize how we need to act today. So I'm getting a lot of like red tape, bureaucratic pushback. So I'm just interested to hear comments from our presenters if that's what they're hearing as well, because I think it's so important that we move forward, because this is going to be a problem. COVID aside, climate change aside, this is a major issue that I think we all have to address.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to, through you, respond to the member. We hear a similar, And so, again, those investments that private corporations wish to make have to have the right environment. And so what we hear is that the environment is one. First of all, these are costly infrastructure investments. That's already going to suggest that private corporations are going to be thoughtful about what they're going to do. When you layer on top of that lengthy approval periods, you end up with an environment where alone private sector corporations are going to be less apt to make those investments. So it's the climate that we create. Now, I will say what we also hear is that climate can be assisted, of course, by public-private partnerships and by government contributing. But when the expectation is that the private sector is going to, within that type of an environment, costly to do and slow approval processes, it becomes a less of an environment and a climate where they're apt to make those investments. Mr. Chair, if that helps the member with the answer.
So I guess kind of supplementary what I would say. So you talked earlier, they talked that basically there's just kind of one way to get your products, and it's a huge issue: exporting, importing, tariffs. It's just constant. Constantly hearing from people in my riding, no matter what industry they're in. I'm in an agricultural riding as well. But I'm just wondering, like when you say that you might have to have another track or something, what are the chances of something like that happening in today's environment, that we're actually going to come up with a solution that really will address the problem?
Perhaps, Mr. Chair, I could quickly answer that. And I think we look at, the federal government has put dollars aside, looking at the National Trade Corridor Fund and 1.9 billion, and then also looking in December funding, looking at the fluidity of supply chains. I think the question is, if we're going to open up new international trade corridors, it means, do we have the CBSA? And I think Christian mentioned this around, pushback perhaps from some of the departments around, resources. So how many people do we have for CBSA to man those new ports? CFIA on the food safety. Then your cold chain. Do we have the appropriate cold chain mechanism in place within those ports? So you start going through just the basic logistical human resources and infrastructure requirements that would need to update these facilities. Is not a short-term solution, but it is something that has to start. And we use an example of Halifax. When the Montreal port was under strike, everyone diverted to either the U.S. or Halifax. Halifax can't handle the volume of product that was going through it, and so we had greater delays coming out of the Halifax port. So there's a need to look at a strategic approach around the various agencies that are involved in just manning the system.
Okay, and I guess
I don't know. About 10 seconds left there, Mr. Dowdle.
Okay, so then I guess I'll just thank you again for being on this, and I just hope if we can get a copy of that the early report in 2019 that Mr. Bodaway had, I'd really like to see that, and I'm sure that the individuals on here and just see how many of those recommendations that we did complete for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dowdle. Next, we have Ms. Koutrakis. Ms. Koutrakis, the floor is now yours. You have 5 minutes, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses for being here this afternoon. And it's really nice to see you again, Mr. Lemaire and Mr. Bouhier. I don't recall if Monsieur Millet was at our roundtable, but it's really great to hear you, and it gives me an opportunity to pick your brain a little bit more, Mr. Lemaire, on the supply chain commissioner. I'm sure you've put a lot of thought behind this, and I'm just wondering if you could share with us a little bit more on what kind of powers would this commissioner have, the kinds of resources that he or she would need. Obviously, it makes sense to have it be an industry person, but issues like whom would they report to and what kind of qualifications would be needed. And finally, do you know of any other country that has a supply chain commissioner in place, and how does that work?
Thank you for the question. Very good to see you again. The quick answer is the U.S. they call it a supply chain czar. And I don't think that's the right word you want to use in this day and age. But the commissioner is in essence needs to have the authority. So you hit a couple key questions, and I think the U.S. is a good example to build off of, but not the perfect example. So if we look at how the commissioner in Canada, so the skill set, the individual has to have direct experience with the various means of transportation in Canada, understanding the ports, understanding the trains, understanding the rail. There are some individuals that exist that have that diversity, because as Christian had mentioned, the complexity that the industry person has to bring to the table is then reconnecting and educating and bringing the departments together to make sure we understand where the short-term, mid-term, and long-term solutions are. Now, the power. And this comes into a big discussion. Unfortunately, I do not think it sits within transport. You need to elevate that responsibility higher within government. And with that, we've had some discussions on a couple different areas, but we haven't landed on what we felt would be the best mechanism as of yet. We're still looking at who would be in the best position to work with bureaucrats and elected officials to provide recommendations on changes to the regulatory environment, looking at our Competition Act, looking at the Transportation Act, the challenges we have around antitrust concerns relative to the shipping industry, and some of those concerns on how we could potentially rectify it. So I would be happy to sit down on this meeting after with any of the committee members to talk more. It's a complex answer, and I don't have time to deliver fully on it, so I apologize.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lemaire, and anything that you can send forward to the committee for, digging deeper into the weeds, I think it would be appreciated by all the members. So thank you for that. My next question is to Mr. Buhagiar. You speak quite a bit about automation, and you did the same thing during our roundtable discussion where automation is key. I'm just wondering if you know of any ports, either in the US or elsewhere, that are leading in automation and that we can model?
Mr. Chair, through you to Ms. Katrakis, good to see you again. And MP Gladue, I think, was asking questions earlier and suggested some organizations like the Port Authorities who must be coming in for the next meeting of the committee. And I might suggest they might be in a better position to answer the question. But having said that, let me take it away and come back to the committee if we have some suggestions that might be best for you.
Okay, great. Maybe you can, I have all my notes from the round table. So as I was quickly writing down notes, at our round table, you use this expression, and I'm paraphrasing, but you said innovation is not always big and sexy. You said, if we have innovation, we cannot have sacred cows. And I believe the sacred cows that you were referring to were restrictions. I'm just wondering, if we are to remain competitive, do you feel that we need to be making some changes to red tapes? And if so, what types of restrictions were you referring to?
Mr. Chair, through you to Ms. Katrakis, I appreciate that I said those things, and those are the things that you took down, but nevertheless, so yes, I think red tape has to be looked at. But I will say, when I was speaking about sacred cows there, and here I'm going to look at the industry that I represent, supply chain professionals have grown up doing it a certain way. They've been taught to do it a certain way. One of the members, and I hope to follow up with him at some point, asked questions about just-in-time. And just-in-time works in Ron's field. It's critical. It's not everywhere. We have to do supply chain differently. There are a lot of thinkers now that are suggesting that the way we did it, the way we looked at forecasting, because this committee's interest is really around transportation and infrastructure, but let's not forget that supply chain is beyond transportation and infrastructure and logistics. It's demand and forecasting. It's a very long end-to-end chain, and it all has to function together. So this notion that we can just get better at forecasting as one sacred cow, because that's what supply chain professionals generally think, let's get better at forecasting. We're not going to get better at forecasting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buhagiar.
We have to get rid of those sacred cows. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Koutrakis. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Barcelo-Duval.
Next up, we have Mr. Barcelo-Duval. You have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Boagia, I like the fact that you referred to sacred cows and just in time. Just in time was something, well, when I was at university, this was the important issue of supply chains. But do you think that just in time can be viewed as a sacred cow to some in the industry?
Mr. Chair, through you to the member, I think for sure, for some within the industry, that and other types of ways and approaches to doing business are sacred cows. And if we're going to be a country that is truly resilient, we have to work through that. That's going to take the leadership of individuals like this that sit on this committee, like governments, like other business leaders and organizations like Ron's and Dave's and Steve's and mine to start the conversation so that they're not viewed as sacred cows. They're not scary, but let's be clear, people grew up, they were trained in these ways, as you've suggested yourself. The key for me in moving forward, if we're going to be resilient, I don't love the word because I'm not sure I can define it, but we need to be responsive, and supply chains need to respond better than they're able to in the construct of what they have today. That's beneficial for everybody. And that responsiveness necessitates visibility. If you don't know where you are and how you're operating at that moment in time, you can't respond well. That's the key for me in resiliency, and something that I certainly would encourage this committee, Mr. Chair, to continue to unpack with other witnesses.
Merci pour votre réponse.
Thank you for your answer. I'd go even further by saying that I have the impression that everyone agrees that the problem with the supply chain is something where we can identify the problems, and today we're viewing it as this big crisis, but we can't have short-term solutions. We've had an accumulation of problems that have occurred, and despite the fact that there seems to be some consensus about this, but we do need a long-term vision. Change takes time. Is there anything that we can do on a short-term basis? A very brief answer, please.
I think there's probably a number of things we can do, but they are going to be, if there are those types of small wins, I think restricted to certain segments and sectors. So Ron has talked about this, Dave has talked about this. I think you have to pick some sectors, some parts within the sector, and you'll get smaller wins there. For a system change, there are not going to be quick, fast wins. I think you're correct in saying there's a longer term approach, but we need to lead to get there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buhager. Merci beaucoup, Mr. Barcelo-Duval. Next, we have Mr. Backrack. Mr. Backrack, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about automation in the port sector, probably for Mr. Buhagiar again. Now, we talked about automation as an approach to resolving some of these supply chain issues. It would seem that there are limitations to that on the labor side. When LA Long Beach automated, it cost 70% of their workforce. Now, when I talk to folks in the port sector, especially ports that are growing rapidly, they tell me that rapid growth really mitigates the impact, the labor shedding impact of automation. But there must be limits to that. I'm wondering, how do we mitigate the long-term impacts of automation in the port sector? Like, we're talking about 70% reduction in workforce. That's really significant for communities. What are your thoughts on that?
And Mr. Chair, through you to the member, I'm not sure I could give an answer that would be valuable or instructive. What I will say is that the goal of automation can be to replace workforce. The goal of automation can be to elevate workforce and allow them to do their work. Those are choices that will be made at individual ports and through strategies that, is best to ask individual ports. So.
Yeah, I appreciate the response, Mr. Buhagiar, and I think that, in an ideal world, we would use technology to increase the requirement for labor, for people working in all of these sectors. The reality, though, that we see across so many sectors, whether it's the auto sector or the forest sector in my neck of the woods, is that investments in technology result in fewer jobs per unit of output, or in the transport sector, per unit shipped. This is a very concerning situation. Obviously, we're not going to solve it in the remaining 5 minutes today, but I am struck by the challenges that this creates for communities, especially communities where a significant part of their workforce is employed in the transportation sector, in the supply chain. Looking down the road, we're going to have to address that challenge around employment. Sorry, that didn't have a question mark at the end, but just a general comment, and I'll cede the remainder of my time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Ms. Landsman. Ms. Landsman, you have 5 minutes. The floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of the witnesses for being with us on this Thursday afternoon. I want to ask the canola growers. You talked a little bit about the labor shortage. At least I think I've got that right in terms of who mentioned it. And I want to know, and I know this isn't the Labor Committee, but I want to know if you can comment on Canada's capacity to train and recruit the right labor when it comes to supply chain jobs and supply chain expertise.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I believe that actually probably be better for Mr. Lemaire. Again, canola, the labor shortages or the labor issues we alluded to were more around the union sort of dynamics with the rail, but I think Ron spoke to more labor issues and maybe on the foreign worker side. I can't speak to, just generally there's a problem filling positions across the economy, certainly as we return from COVID, but I might defer to Mr. Lemaire as I believe it was his testimony.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to quickly respond. The temporary foreign worker program, whether on farm, is onto itself a separate program, but the temporary foreign worker program from post-farm gate, where we're actually asking the government to increase the cap from 10% to 30%, an emergency strategy to try and bring more workers in to fill some of those key roles that, could be everything from butchers to working in meat plants to functioning in warehouses and produce, packing sheds, anything that doesn't have a direct link to the farm. That's one example of a quick change in solutions. I'd mentioned immigration as another key strategy and targeted structure, and the work currently underway with the government to streamline and support those Ukrainians that are coming to Canada and during the crisis, and trying to support them potentially with whatever resources they need, and potential employment is another option that our industry is very open, not only for those Ukrainian refugees coming to Canada, but others coming to the country as well.
I want to just change over to the issue of rail, and I know that we've had a number of issues over the past couple of years, and just recently. Can you talk a little bit about what the stopgap is? Is it the lack of infrastructure? Is it the lack of service? Is it in terms of getting products to market or getting products to the coasts?
Steve, do you want to?
Real quick, yes, I'm going to share that answer. One of the problems we have with the rail is definitely the quantity of equipment that is available. When we have seen in the past several years, the amount of ship going to Halifax port was increased incredibly. If the rails only have 500 pieces of equipment available in a day, and there's a capacity for 1,000 container, it's just backlogging continuously. And don't forget that there's at least 2, 3, 4 different company involved, from the shipping line to the unloading to the subcontracting carrier that will move container sometimes directly from the port to rail, which is maybe only 1 or 2 kilometers, but sometimes it's not available straight on the port. And then there's a rail transportation services and a fourth company here locally that will actually take this container to your yard. A lot of people, most of these companies, they're all short labored. So you got lack of equipment. Everybody is backlogging on jobs. So every company that you deal with, every step will have a few days delay here, a few days delay. At the end, it add up a week to 10 days easily. But the availability of equipment is definitely a key feature.
Does anybody else want to opine on that? I think we're going down an interesting path here.
Sure, I could just make a quick comment. Certainly in our sector, Western Canadian grain sector, we've seen billions of dollars in investment from grain exporting and handling companies in country, with the the redevelopment of all and the new building of the best technology for the grain collection. We've seen billions of dollars in the last, let's call it, a decade at port, specifically Vancouver, as far as getting the grain out of the export terminals into the boats. And it seemed, and then on both ends of that, there's contractual relationships with, daily charges that go both ways for contract breaches and time penalties. And we do give credit. I mean, the railways, they have a tough job. We have a tough geography to operate. We've got a long distance to move that grain from in country to the export position. But certainly the shippers of grain products in Western Canada would like to see some tightened relationships with the railways as far as contractually, and with the ability to have more robust reciprocal penalties put into that. That's been talked about around this committee and in various pieces of legislation over the last, let's call it, since 2009-ish. But that's still something we'd like to see as a sector, tightening up the...
Thank you very much, Mr. Pratt, and thank you very much, Ms. Landsman. Finally, we have Mr. Chahal. Mr. Chahal, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for all of you for your testimony today. I'm going to start with Mr. Lemaire. You talked a little bit about reforming shipping legislation like they are doing in the U.S. So could you talk a little bit more on that and what lessons we can learn, whether it's from that specific legislation or any other examples? Mr. Lemaire?
Sorry about that. My system just froze on me. So just reference some recent information from the U.S. looking at, some of the key pieces that's coming out of the House of Representatives bill, and that is introduction of an Ocean Shipping Antitrust Enforcement Act, which is one key piece around trying to deal with, I guess, the oligarchy of shipping lines that are in the market, totally controlling, channel routes, container movement. And it is a challenge for, a Canadian jurisdiction, even a large entity like the U.S. The other side is looking at how do we understand the actual, in the U.S., are looking at a consideration of their Shipping Reform Act. So when we look in Canada and look at our the Canada Transportation Act, and looking at how we can leverage it to use and ensure that we have, shipping lines and the broader transportation system more effectively supported. And I think we heard Mr. Pratt mention a few key pieces around rail on dispute resolution and some other key elements. We need to take it as a whole and start looking at the regulatory levers that we can effectively adjust and put in place to basically enable businesses that aren't in a position to negotiate the power to effectively compete in the domestic and global markets.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Buhagiar, question for you. You talked about a national strategy that's needed and a North American strategy. I'm wondering if you could provide any insights on interprovincial barriers that are making our supply chains less efficient, and if you have any areas that we can improve on that.
Mr. Chair, through you to the member, thanks for the question. It's an important one. I'm not sure today I have specific examples, but I'll follow up with some to the committee. I do want to make a general observation, though. Supply chains don't have political borders, right? They don't see geography in that sense. So there are, and during the pandemic, there were lots of examples of provinces that put certain restrictions in place, the transportation sector, that meant that somebody crossed a border and all of a sudden they had different rules. We have some of that today with respect to the type of information that provinces want, particularly in the trucking as people go through provinces. So it's a challenge. And that's why, for me, a national strategy with all levels of government, and let me be clear, municipalities play a role in that. We can have, the federal government can have the most incredible transportation strategy, even working with provinces, and it can break down in a municipality when Toronto, I'm just going to pick on Toronto today because I'm from the GTA, Toronto will place certain rules on the transportation within its streets, which breaks down the chain again. So I know Ron and I have spoken passionately about this before, a whole of government approach, which is a whole of governments, plural, approach, is really what is key if we're going to have a supply chain in Canada that is amongst the best in the world.
And to add on that, I'm glad you mentioned that. And there's a lot of talk about challenges at our ports and modernization, but what's the opportunities with growth, particularly in Western Canada? We know what's happening in Vancouver and Prince Rupert with growth for the inland ports. So Edmonton, Calgary. My riding's got the Calgary International Airport. We have 2 rail lines that come into our city. What are the opportunities for inland ports, and what do we got to do in Western Canada to make sure that the centers like Calgary and Edmonton and Regina can also flourish for growth and opportunities in inland ports?
Mr. Chair, through you to the member, that's a perfect question. We talk mostly about our seaports, but our inland ports are critical. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention in the center of our country, Centre Point in Manitoba, which is another great example. The simple answer is we need to invest more. We need more inland logistics ports. And it isn't just a Western issue, but I appreciate your perspective on the West, but it is an issue that we need to address all over Canada. So inland ports are a critical piece of the overall infrastructure we have to look at and invest in.
Chair, I think my time's up. I'd like to ask more if I have more time, but...
It is, unfortunately, Mr. Chahal. I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to thank, on behalf of the entire committee, all of our witnesses for being here today and for providing your expertise and your time to us on this very important study for all Canadians. I'd ask that invite you all to now log off and kindly request that my colleagues remain online for some very important housekeeping that I've been asked by the clerk to engage in. Thank you very much again, witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
Colleagues, I know that you want to, especially some of you who take flights, you've made it very clear you'd like to leave as quickly as possible after 5:30. We started a little late today, so I apologize for that, waiting for members to get back into the committee room. The clerk has asked me to take care of some housekeeping today that will take 1 minute, if you'll permit me, and it's regarding 2 study budgets that we need to approve quickly. So, Mr. Clerk, I will turn it over to you for a minute of perhaps explaining exactly what we need to be doing, and then we'll have a quick vote.
Right. Well, actually, we just need someone. Oh, Marilyn.
Motion to approve both of the budgets as presented.
There we go.
Well, that was quick. That's why we miss you, Marilyn. Moved by Ms. Gladue. All those in favor? Agreed. All those opposed? Thank you very much, Ms. Gladue, and thank you very much to all members for the great meeting we just had. Wish you all a wonderful weekend. This meeting is now adjourned.
I'll be back on Monday.